I'm Vanessa, 35 years old, and I've been married to Greg for 8 years. Like any other couple, we've had our ups and downs, but I always believed our marriage was strong, until I discovered something that changed everything. I had been deceiving him for months, actually even longer. The worst part, I never intended for it to happen, but when it did, I couldn't bring myself to confess the truth. I thought I had everything under control, that I could keep this little secret buried. But, like most secrets, they eventually come to light. It all began the day my friend Rachel came over for a visit. Greg was in the other room, finishing up some work on his computer, so I assumed we'd be fine to talk. Rachel had a way of being brutally honest, sometimes too honest. Though her words could sting, they were often comforting. But on that particular day, her honesty was the last thing I needed. We were chatting about life, as we usually did, how things were going, how the kids were doing, the usual small talk. But then Rachel said something that cut through me like a knife. She laughed as if it were a joke and said, "He has no idea, does he? That kid's not even his, and he's out here thinking he's a dad." She laughed again, but I could hear the cruelty in it. I froze. My heart plummeted to my stomach. My blood turned cold. She wasn't talking about just any man. She was talking about Greg, my husband, the man who had been raising my son, not knowing he wasn't his own. I couldn't believe I hadn't realized it sooner. I couldn't believe I had let her speak like that in my own home. In that moment, everything crashed down on me like a ton of bricks. I had kept this secret from Greg for so long. I had watched him pour his heart, his love, and his energy into raising a child that wasn't biologically his. I had seen him care for our son as if he were his own, and all the while, I had been lying to his face. Not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear of what would happen if I told him the truth. Fear of losing everything. But now, in the silence of my living room as Rachel mocked him, I couldn't deny it anymore. The truth was out there, and it was about to shatter everything. I had to make a choice. Do I tell him, confess everything, or continue pretending? For a fleeting moment, I thought I could just keep it to myself, distance myself from Rachel, and act as if she had never said a word. But deep down, I knew I couldn't hide it forever. I knew that whatever happened next, everything was going to crumble. Before I could say anything, Rachel left. I was left standing in the suffocating silence, feeling as though the walls were closing in on me. I had no idea what to do, no way to fix it. And most of all, I didn't know how to stop Greg from finding out. But little did I know, he had already heard everything. Greg had overheard it all. He heard Rachel's words, every single one of them. And that was the moment everything changed. I had no idea he was even listening. Greg was usually so focused on his work that he barely noticed what was happening around him. But that day, he must have been paying closer attention than I thought. He had been in his office down the hall, and somehow he had caught every word. I didn't realize it then, but his silence after Rachel left told me everything I needed to know. He didn't come out of his office, didn't say anything. It was as if the air itself was holding its breath. Something fell off, but I didn't want to face it. Not then, not like that. Later that night, Greg finally stepped into the kitchen while I was making dinner. He stood there for a long time, just watching me. His eyes were cold, as if he were waiting for me to speak. I tried to ignore it, stirring the pot on the stove, acting like nothing was wrong. But my heart was pounding. I knew what was coming. "Vanessa," he finally spoke, his voice low and eerily calm. I heard everything. I froze. My grip on the spoon tightened so hard I thought it might snap. I didn't know what to say. Should I lie? Should I deny it? My mind raced through every possible excuse, but none of them felt right. "Everything?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Heat crept up my neck, my face flushing with shame and guilt. "Yeah," he said, his tone tense. "Everything. Rachel's not exactly subtle, is she?" His words dripped with sarcasm, but there was no humor, only pain. I couldn't look at him. I couldn't face him. I just kept stirring the pot, pretending as if nothing had changed. But he wasn't going to let me escape. I don't know how long you've been lying to me, he continued, but I'm done, Vanessa. I'm done being a fool. His words hit me like a slap in the face. I couldn't breathe. The truth was out, hanging in the air between us, and there was no taking it back. I never wanted this to happen, I whispered, my voice barely audible. But as soon as the words left my lips, I knew they were useless. Nothing I could say would undo the damage I had done. Greg let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, well, you don't get to decide when the truth comes out, Vanessa. I trusted you. I trusted you with everything. And this is how you repay me. I turned around, finally meeting his gaze. The look in his eyes wasn't just anger. It was something far worse. It was disappointment. I had broken something in him that no apology could ever fix. I didn't want to hurt you, I said, my voice trembling. I was scared, Greg. I didn't know what to do, and I thought I could just... You thought you could just keep lying? That I'd never find out? His voice rose, frustration spilling out. You thought I'd just keep raising a kid that's not mine, and everything would be fine? Do you even hear yourself? I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes. But I refused to cry, not in front of him. Not like this. I was terrified of losing you, I admitted. I didn't want to lose everything, Greg. I didn't want to lose our family. But it was too late. He didn't say another word. He just turned and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, consumed by guilt. The next few days were a blur. Greg barely spoke to me. He wouldn't even look at me. It felt like we were living in two separate worlds, both weighed down by an unbearable burden. I tried to talk to him, to apologize, but he shut me down every time. His pain was evident, and I knew I had no one to blame but myself. I don't know how much longer I can pretend everything is fine. The silence between us is suffocating, and I can't seem to break through it. I don't know if I can fix this. I don't even know if I deserve to. But one thing is clear. Greg isn't the man I thought he was, and I am not the woman I believe myself to be. I don't know where the story will end, but I do know things will get much worse before they get better. The days dragged on, filled with unbearable tension. Greg barely spoke, and when he did, his words were sharp, slicing through the silence. I could see the pain in his eyes, and it tore me apart, but nothing I said seemed to reach him. It was as if I had shattered something inside him, something beyond repair. I tried to be patient, to give him space, but the growing distance between us was unbearable. I couldn't stand seeing him like this, and I hated myself for causing him such pain. But I still didn't know what to do. How do you recover from a lie like this? How do you rebuild a marriage when the very foundation has cracked beyond repair? A week later, everything came to a head. We were sitting in the living room, avoiding each other's gaze. Greg had been distant, scrolling mindlessly through his phone, while I sat on edge, waiting for him to say something, anything, to break the silence. Then, out of nowhere, he spoke. His voice was quiet, but there was a finality to it that made my heart sink. I've been thinking, he started, his eyes never meeting mine. And I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending everything is okay. I don't even know if I can look at you the same way. I couldn't breathe. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. I'm not saying I don't love you, he continued, his voice cracking slightly. But trust is everything in a marriage, Vanessa, and you destroyed that. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Tears welled in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I'm sorry, I whispered, barely able to get the words out. I never meant to hurt you. I didn't know what else to do. Greg shook his head, his jaw tightening. It doesn't matter now. The damage is done. You made your choice. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had chosen to lie, to keep the truth hidden, and now I was facing the consequences. And it wasn't just me suffering. Greg was too. I don't know what to do, Greg, I said, my voice trembling. I don't know how to fix this. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. I don't either, Vanessa. I don't even know if I want to fix it. He nodded slowly, his eyes softening slightly, but I could still see the doubt lingering within them. He was willing to try, yet I could sense it would take time. More time than I had anticipated, and perhaps more than I truly deserved. The following days were anything but easy. We spoke, but our conversations were stilted, filled with uneasy pauses and uncertainty. I felt like I was treading on thin ice, terrified that any misstep would push him even further away. There were no heated arguments, but the distance between us remained vast, and every glance in his direction served as a painful reminder of the trust one had shattered. Just when I started to believe we were making progress, Greg blindsided me with yet another revelation. One evening, after dinner, he sat me down. His demeanor was calm, but his expression was grave. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, his voice steady yet laced with finality. "And I don't know if I can keep pretending that everything is okay. I don't know if I can be the person you need me to be right now. And I'm not sure I can ever move past what happened." My heart plummeted. His words tore through me, leaving me breathless. I had convinced myself that we were healing, that we were finding a way back to each other. But in that moment, it felt like he was slipping away once more. "I understand," I murmured, barely able to speak past the lump forming in my throat. "I know I've hurt you, Greg. I know this isn't something that can be mended overnight, and I don't expect instant forgiveness. But please, believe me when I say that I'm trying. I want to fix this. I want to fix us." He remained silent for what felt like an eternity, simply staring at me. The air between us was thick with uncertainty. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need time, Vanessa," he said softly. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again, but I'm not ready to give up on us just yet." It was in that moment that I fully grasped how much I stood to lose. I had taken our marriage for granted, believing we were unbreakable, but I had allowed a lie to fester and grow until it became something far more destructive than I could have ever imagined. I didn't know what the future held for us, but one thing was certain: I couldn't alter the past. All I could do was try to rebuild his trust, one step at a time. Greg and I put forth our best efforts. We truly did. But sometimes, no matter how much you want to undo the damage, trying simply isn't enough. We spent weeks talking, and in those moments, I allowed myself to hope. I thought we were finding our way back, but every time I looked into his eyes, the pain remained. The disappointment, the unspoken resentment, backslash. Then one afternoon, Greg came home early. He looked exhausted, but there was something different about him. His posture was rigid, as if he were bracing himself for something monumental. "I've been thinking about this for a while," he began, his tone low and steady. "And I can't do this anymore, Vanessa. I can't pretend like everything is fine. I don't think I can ever move past this." He exhaled deeply before continuing. "The trust is gone, and without that, I don't know who we are anymore." It felt as though the ground had vanished beneath me. My breath hitched, my chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't speak. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though the words felt woefully inadequate. Greg gave me a sad, almost defeated look. "I'm not angry anymore," he admitted, "but I don't know how to move forward. I can't keep living like this." I nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking deep into my soul. I had seen this coming, yet nothing could have prepared me for the finality of it. "I understand," I forced out, though the words felt foreign on my tongue. My heart ached with the realization. I ruined everything, didn't I? He remained silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the floor. The air between us was suffocating, heavy with things left unsaid. Finally, he lifted his head and spoke again, his voice strained. "I think it's time for us to separate. I need to be alone. I need space to figure out what I want. And right now, I don't think I want to stay in this marriage." The word struck me like a harsh slap, sharp and unforgiving. My stomach twisted, and I felt the sting of impending tears, but I refused to let them fall. I had no right to cry. This was the price of my choices. I never meant for it to end like this, I whispered, my voice barely holding together. I never thought it would come to this. I'm so sorry, Greg. I'll always love you. He looked at me one last time, his face a mix of sorrow and resignation. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say more, but in the end, he simply shook his head. I think it's better this way, he said quietly. I need to move on. And just like that, the reality of our ending settled over me. He packed a bag, grabbed a few belongings, and walked out. I stood frozen, listening to the sound of his footsteps fade away, each one like a nail in the coffin of our marriage. The days that followed blurred together. I spent most of my time lost in thought, reflecting on everything I had lost. I had destroyed my marriage, and now I had to come to terms with the painful truth. It was over. I couldn't turn back time, couldn't erase my betrayal. The damage was too deep, and no apology could mend it. I didn't know what the future held. I had no direction, no clear path forward. All I could do was take it one step at a time, trying to piece together what remained in my life. There were no guarantees, no promises that things would ever be okay again. All I had left was the undeniable truth. I was responsible for what happened, and now I had to find a way to rebuild, one painful step at a time.